There are moments in life when someone walks away and it feels as if everything inside us begins to collapse. That person who used to reply to our messages, who looked at us with tenderness, who made us feel seen and valued. Suddenly, they're gone, and we're left standing there, caught in a silent storm of questions. What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? Why wasn't I enough? This scene, though deeply personal, is far more common than we might think, but it is rarely understood in its full emotional depth. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychoanalyst, saw these breaking points not as punishments, but as pivotal moments. Portals, in fact. To him, rejection, painful as it is not just an emotional wound. It's a symbolic experience, pointing us towards something much greater. The opportunity to confront who we truly are, beyond the relationships we think we need to define us. Jung taught that the psyche finds balance in polarities, light and shadow, acceptance and rejection, consciousness and the unconscious. This wasn't a moral split between right and wrong, but a profound vision of the human soul, urging us to look at the totality of our being. He didn't frame life as a battlefield between good and evil, but as a sacred dance between opposites that are seeking to reconcile in a wider, deeper, more conscious center. The shadow, the parts of ourselves we prefer to ignore, is not something to be destroyed, but something that longs to be acknowledged and embraced. What we deny in ourselves doesn't simply vanish. It hides, it wears a mask, and eventually it shows up again, through our relationships, our desires, and most of all, our wounds. Every painful event, especially rejection, is a symbolic manifestation of something within us, crying out to be integrated. It's not by chance that the moments which hurt the most are the ones that brush up against our deepest insecurities. It's not random that the people who affect us most stir up old emotions we thought we had long since buried. Life, in its archetypal wisdom, uses these moments not to punish us, but to push us inward, to the uncharted regions of our psyche that we have yet to claim as our own. Rejection is not the universe handing us a verdict that we are not enough. More often, it is a signal, a message that there are parts of ourselves we have abandoned or forgotten. Perhaps we projected our worth onto someone else, hoping they would validate us from the outside. Maybe we ignored our authentic needs out of fear of losing connection. Or perhaps we built our entire identity on shaky ground, shaped by other people's expectations and wounds we never dared to heal. But when rejection enters the picture, those structures begin to crack. And it is through those cracks that consciousness can finally seep in. Rather than treating our pain like an error that needs a quick fix, Jung invites us to explore the deeper symbolism of the experience. He urges us to ask, what part of me is being called to the surface? Is it my self-worth that needs to be rebuilt from within? Is it my authenticity begging to rise again after years of trying to please others? Is it the inner child, the most innocent, raw part of me, that's longing to be loved unconditionally? Each rejection carries a hidden message. Each emotion it stirs is a voice from the soul. Being rejected does not mean we are being denied by the universe. More often, it means we are being gently, sometimes forcefully, pushed toward a fundamental part of ourselves that we have yet to meet. It's a call to stop searching for answers outside and to begin looking inward, with honesty, with courage. And it's in this radical act of facing what hurts without judgment that real transformation begins. The true inner alchemy starts here, when we integrate what was once in shadow and allow a fuller, more authentic, more liberated version of ourselves to emerge. The ego, fragile as it is, yearns to be loved. It craves to be seen, validated, recognized by others. It builds itself from mirrors, what others think of us, what we manage to portray, what we believe will make us worthy of love. But that's a survival mechanism. It's a way to protect ourselves from the terrifying vastness of the inner void. And yet, if we dare to walk through that void, if we dare to lose what we thought defined us, we might just find something far greater waiting on the other side. Our own truth, no longer dependent on someone else's gaze, but anchored in who we truly are. As Jung wisely warned, the ego is not the center of the psyche's totality, but merely a small fraction of it. Beneath the ego lies the soul, a deeper, unconscious, and profoundly wise dimension. The soul does not crave admiration. It longs for wholeness. It's not interested in fleeting approval, in applause or praise that fades with time. What it seeks is the kind of truth that cannot be compromised or negotiated. This is why, when rejection strikes and the ego begins to fracture, something ancient and sacred within us awakens. The soul stirs, and suddenly, rejection is no longer just an emotional wound. It becomes a threshold, a mysterious gateway that invites us to descend from the surface identity we show the world into the hidden depths of our true being. It is in those painful moments, when everything external begins to collapse, that our gaze can finally turn inward, not as an act of isolation or escape, but as a path to redemption, a return to self. Because beneath the desperate need to be liked lies an even deeper longing to be real, not perfect, not accepted, not celebrated, just real. And instead of chasing someone else's validation to cover up our pain, Jung invites us to ask different questions, the kind that expand our awareness. These are not questions that offer quick or easy answers, but questions that plant the seeds of transformation. What part of me has been wounded? Could it be the inner child who still feels he's not enough? Perhaps it's the carefully crafted image I've worked so hard to build, the one designed to make me likable. Maybe it's the yearning for belonging, which once again was met with a closed door. To recognize which part of us has been hurt is not a weakness, it is clarity. It is the first honest step in a healing process that can only begin in truth. What image of myself is now falling apart? Is it possible that the pain of rejection isn't just about what I've lost externally, but about what has crumbled internally? Maybe I believed that if I was good enough, if I was perfect, if I adapted to others' needs, I wouldn't be abandoned. Maybe I created an ideal self, a false version of who I thought I needed to be. And now, in the face of pain, that illusion is showing its cracks. But this collapse is not only necessary, it is sacred. Because only when the illusion of who we think we are dies can the truth of who we really are begin to emerge. And within that process comes a crucial question. What part of me have I been sacrificing for the sake of fitting in? What quality within me am I no longer willing to betray just to be accepted? Here lies the hidden gift of rejection. Deep inside the wound, there's a force yearning to be born, a truth that no longer wants to be silenced for the sake of love, a sense of worth that refuses to be tied to others' approval. This kind of realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, gradually, but when it does, it liberates. We begin to reclaim ourselves. We become whole, not because the world suddenly accepts us, but because we stop giving ourselves away in fragments. Rejection, then, ceases to be the end of a story. It becomes the beginning of a homecoming. a return to that inner home where we no longer beg for a place to belong because we've remembered something essential, our innate right to exist with dignity. Becoming someone others don't want to lose is not about seduction, manipulation, or emotional tactics. It's not about refining an image or polishing ourselves into something more desirable. It's not about collecting charming gestures or learning how to please others better. The real work, the deep, sacred work, is becoming someone we ourselves don't want to lose. And that journey begins the moment we stop running from rejection and start listening to what it's trying to show us. In Carl Jung's vision, much of what we do to be noticed, desired, or validated is nothing more than a superficial game played by the ego. The ego is endlessly chasing applause, clinging to recognition, desperate to be someone in the eyes of others. But the soul doesn't care for any of that. The soul longs for something much deeper. It yearns for wholeness, not approval. And that's why the real journey isn't about making others love us more, but about learning how to never abandon ourselves again. True transformation begins not when others finally see our worth, but when we decide to stop begging to be seen. Becoming truly unforgettable has nothing to do with the desire to be needed. It's born from the courage to become indispensable to oneself, to choose a life that isn't built on the fear of abandonment, but on the fullness that arises when we truly inhabit ourselves. This kind of evolution doesn't take place in the surface-level dynamics of relationships, nor in the fleeting reactions of the world. It unfolds in the deep, sacred silence of the soul, in that inner territory where one begins to reconstruct oneself from the roots, not in order to please, not to fit into an external mold or satisfy an inherited ideal, but to be true, to become who one really is. When someone achieves this, when they build themselves upon the foundation of inner solidity rather than on the shaky need for approval, something shifts. Even the way the world perceives them changes. That person is no longer seen as someone waiting to be completed. They are seen as someone who has already found themselves. And that is what draws others in, not with an urge to possess, but with the impossibility of ignoring something so real. Those who become irreplaceable don't do so because they meet everyone's expectations. They become irreplaceable because they have descended into the depths of their own being and returned with a fire that only authenticity can ignite. It's visible in their eyes, in the way they walk, in the serene strength they carry, unafraid to be alone. There is something profoundly magnetic about a person who has transformed their wound into alchemy and their solitude into creative power. Someone who has known rejection, yet chooses not to hide behind pride, not to self-blame or beg for love, but instead chooses to be reborn, activates an energy that words can hardly express. It's not an act, it's not performance, it's a presence, a glow, a peace that doesn't depend on recognition, because it arises from a conscious and radical self-love. That magnetism isn't a tactic, it's not a trait they've trained. It's the visible expression of a soul that no longer denies itself. It's the vibration of someone who has walked through pain and emerged not hardened, but more human, more tender, more free. Only when one dares not to flee from oneself does that unmistakable light emerge, the kind of light no one wants to lose, the light of someone who has learned to love themselves without conditions. In this world, where so many are seeking validation, where social media rewards appearances and society feeds an endless hunger for approval, the person who validates themselves becomes something deeply rare, almost sacred. Jung already sensed this. The more we search outside for what is missing inside, the further we move away from our own wholeness. The soul doesn't want popularity. It wants completion. It doesn't seek praise. It seeks meaning. That's why the person who stands from their own center, who doesn't ask for permission to exist, begins to radiate a vibration that transcends appearances. The person who no longer needs to belong in order to feel complete is no longer at the mercy of emotional tides. They stop trading their values for acceptance. They no longer shrink to avoid discomfort. They don't swell with praise, and they don't collapse with neglect. They have found within themselves a source that doesn't dry up from rejection, nor overflow from external attention. That kind of inner stability is a miracle in our time, because in a world hypersensitive to the gaze of others, being free from judgment is revolutionary. There is something profoundly powerful, even if quiet, about someone who has made peace with themselves. They don't need to speak much, or persuade, or use strategies to attract. Their very presence brings calm, not because they're perfect, but because they've stopped being at war with themselves. And that peace, that serenity, that doesn't rely on outside conditions, is perhaps the rarest and most precious thing today. In the vibration of someone who has become whole, there is something unmistakable, even if unnamed: integrity, truth, authenticity. From a Jungian perspective, becoming someone unforgettable is not an external achievement. It's the result of an inner process, the process of individuation. It's not about social success. It's a transformation of the soul. It means facing your own shadows with courage. It means making peace with your contradictions. It means integrating the exiled parts of yourself. Only someone who has gone through this inner alchemy, who has accepted their wounds, their darkness, their story, can radiate a light that doesn't blind but guides. Because this transformation is alchemy. The ability to transmute the lead of rejection, that heavy, painful, paralyzing feeling, into the gold of self-knowledge. It's not about revenge. It's not about pride. It's about evolution, about walking through the fire of abandonment and coming out the other side more awake, more lucid, more alive. It is a journey towards psychic freedom, where one stops living to be chosen and begins to live to be true. And when that happens, everything else follows. Because authenticity isn't something you chase, it's something you find. And when someone embodies it, they inevitably become unforgettable. Not because they tried to, but because truth has that kind of power. Real power, the kind that doesn't need to shout or conquer, is born the moment we stop trying to prove ourselves. When we let go of the compulsion to be seen, to be liked, to be validated. That's when the soul finally breathes. And that's when others feel something in our presence that cannot be explained, only felt. Carl Jung might have described it as the pivotal moment when the conscious self stops identifying with the masks of the ego and begins to align with the self, the deepest, most authentic essence of being. It is in that precise moment that self-love no longer depends on the applause of others, and the sense of self-worth is no longer defined by the presence or permanence of someone else in our lives. Inner security no longer fluctuates with comings and goings. It becomes rooted, sacred, unshakable. When this transformation takes place, the human being stops being merely a personality, a projection, or a social strategy to belong. Instead, they become presence, essence. They no longer need to prove anything, to impose themselves, to explain, or to insist. There is something in the way they move through the world that leaves a mark, even in silence. They don't cling, they don't beg, they don't plead to stay. But for those who find them, letting go becomes profoundly difficult. Their energy offers peace, their truth is tangible, and their authenticity, in a world suffocating in masks, becomes a quiet revolution. We live in times where falseness multiplies rapidly. Relationships exhaust themselves in fear, and most people are trying to become something for someone else before learning to be something for themselves. In such a context, authenticity becomes a radical act of courage. The one who chooses not to dress to be liked, not to speak to be accepted, not to act from fear of being alone, begins to shine with a light that was never intended to illuminate. And yet, it illuminates. That light is the reflection of a soul that no longer begs for love, because it has found itself amid the noise and chaos. And most importantly, the person who becomes what no one wants to lose does not do so to be desired. They don't do it to be the center of attention. They don't do it to prove they're worthy of being chosen. They do it because they've chosen wholeness as their way of life, because they've understood that they don't need to be chosen by anyone else if they haven't first chosen themselves. That's when everything begins to shift. The frequency with which one walks through life changes entirely. Decisions are no longer born out of fear of being left, but from the desire to create, to express, to live from fullness. The heart no longer begs for love, because it already carries it within. The mind no longer fabricates stories to justify someone else's departure. And all the energy that was once invested in waiting, longing, hoping is redirected toward expansion, toward authenticity, toward the conscious creation of a unique and self-defined path. That is the new kind of power. Not the power that dominates or forces, but the one that radiates. Not the power that seeks to control, but the one that trusts. A silent, unstoppable force. Because the one who has learned to stay with themselves no longer fears losing anyone. And paradoxically, that is the person no one wants to lose. Rejection stops being a wound and becomes a sacred invitation to awaken. Carl Jung taught us that every shadow reveals a truth, and every loss pushes us toward deeper integration of the self. Becoming the kind of person no one wants to lose is not about external conquest. It is an internal reconciliation. It is the decision to choose authenticity over approval, fulfillment over dependence, and truth over performance. In a world oversaturated with appearances, the person who validates themselves from within shines with a power that cannot be imitated. They do not seek to stay in anyone's life. They stay in their own. And from that place of self-love, of presence, of depth, they transform everything. They turn energy into magnetism, pain into power, and solitude into absolute freedom. Because the soul does not want to please. It wants to be whole, and whoever becomes whole becomes unforgettable. So remember, when you choose to be yourself in a world that constantly invites you to pretend, you become a beacon of authenticity, a soul that shines effortlessly. You are not here to beg for love. You are here to be love. You didn't come to fit in. You came to awaken. And when you choose yourself above all else, the entire universe begins to rearrange itself in your favor. If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to continue exploring together the profound wisdom of Carl Jung and the transformative power of the inner self. Activate the bell so you don't miss any content that nourishes your soul, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that wholeness begins from within. See you on the next journey to the depths of you.